So for the sake of my talk title, I also want to introduce my design-related background. So I studied industrial design as an undergrad and interaction design while I was doing master and PhD at MIT. And now I'm kind of practicing engineering design at mechanical engineering department at UC Berkeley. So yeah, a lot to reflect. And that's a reason I kind of wanted to leverage this platform to bounce some ideas around regarding what as designers across different fields, what can we do in an age that's kind of exciting and also stressful. So friends who know me know that I'm a big fan of Issey Miyake, a fashion brand, because they always use intricate origami structures. It has very rich ways of manufacturing those fabrics behind the scene as well. So the first time I got my hand on a generative model, I was like, yeah, no way they can produce, Issey Miyake clothes. And this was what I got at 11 p.m. Then I just spent the whole night playing with the diffusion app. And that was, I'm sure you all had this aha moment and shocking moment when you played with generative AI tools. But that was my anxious aha moment. And in the past few years, as designers, we always get this, I almost want to call it a culture shock of what we could do and what AI could do and what we could do, but not as good as what AI can do. So this goes beyond just simple aesthetics, right? You were talking about nowadays AI can design for function and for structural. And as a mechanical engineer, we also see AI are designing performative metamaterials for thermal regulations, for aerodynamics, etc. So really, it makes me think: are we becoming obsolete? For all the knowledges and educations I got, what should I do, and what I should teach my students to do? So, in reflecting what the role designers could be, we should perhaps look at some of the future problems or present problems designers are facing. Really, in my perspective, there's unhealthy planet, and perhaps you can call it also an unhealthy society that designers have to deal with. I'm thinking about my 18-year-old daughter. I think this is kind of the question she has to deal with if she becomes a designer as well. So, role of future design. That's some ideas. Again, I wouldn't say it's mature thoughts. I would really love your critical feedbacks. Please feel free to interrupt me as I'm talking this through. So when we think about the role of design, I really like this framework on the left-hand side. This is generated by dear mentor Nairi Oxman and some of her collaborators. So it's one of those frameworks placing design, I think, formally together in these other domains, including art, science, and engineering. I loved it because I think it's really drawing a full circle to think about human knowledge. Then here comes my ecocentric version of putting design in the center. I don't think it's necessarily true for everything, but it's a very interesting lens for me to reflect what designers' role could be. If we put design in the center, we would think about design as a way to practice experiences that could inspire art. A design could generate utility that could contribute to engineering. And through your design practice, you could also along the way generate knowledge which contribute to science. So that's going to be kind of the thread and the lens I use. And then I will also talk about some sort of my 6 principles of what I see could be interesting for future designers, and use the case study of morphing matter to articulate these 6 principles. I use morphing matter, just that's what my lab is doing, and I want to talk about some aspects through that lens. So let's just go one by one. As I mentioned, one of the bigger issues that future designers will face is the unhealthy planet. I think it's really important that designers, when they look at different design problems, they carry a mindset of environmental responsibility. So as designers, again, so we produce a lot of things. In the lab, you'll see a whole shelf of collections of different physical artifacts. And we are most of the time proud of it, but sometimes we also reflect we're just bring a lot of trash and garbage into this planet. This is often because the nature-centered design and human-centered designs are not all the time aligned. So in the lab, we started to reflect and think about maybe there are certain projects, if we carefully choose them, they could bring these two principles in coherence. So that brings to a kind of a multi-year effort for the lab to think about what if we can put a sustainable keyword in front of morphing matter. So what does it mean? It could mean reconfigurable, shape-changing smart materials and structures that are designed with sustainable design principle, or these type of smart materials and structures could contribute to sustainable applications. So if you're interested in this topic, there is a review paper we recently published. Basically, we chose some projects from our lab and also the projects we love, broadly speaking, involving robots and smart devices. And we try to break it down how through the manufacturing, the transportation, the use, and also the after the life phases, people are being very consciously designing the functions and also the production pipeline to be sustainable. So I'm not gonna go a lot into details about this, but I just wanted to convey the message. I think it's really interesting and challenging and important for designers, in our case, right, smart materials and structure designers, to think through those problems systematically. So here comes a more concrete case study. I've been fascinated by food design for a really long time since PhD. Originally, I thought it was just cool, thinking about morphable structures that we can produce in the kitchen. And then later, after a lot of bouncing around ideas with Target and some big food manufacturers, we realized food industry is actually an industry that produces lots of pollutions. And maybe our morphing materials can help. So that really gave a birth of the project I'm going to talk about. So if you care about the pollutions, you would know food packaging is one of the largest sources of plastic waste, and also if you think about, like possible commodity food, lots of plastic are being generated and a lot of greenhouses are being generated because of the consumption and preparation of such as pasta. So we're looking at pasta more specifically. So if you think about macaroni pasta, about 60% plastic packaging space is used to pack air. So really my sales pitch to Barilla, an Italian pasta manufacturer, and also Target, is that, if we can make food flatly packable, kind of like how you pack IKEA furniture, you can really save a lot of plastic packaging space, therefore plastic, and then you can perhaps save the planet a little bit from that perspective. This turns out to be a morphing food project. So what you see on the left-hand side is the flat packable pasta. So those were flatly manufactured, flatly packed. And once you boil them, they can turn into a 3D shape that's desired by the consumers. So this video is showing different examples. Basically, they are all flatly packed to start with. And as you cook them, they take on different shapes. This is a flat square shape. And as you cook them, they turn into a saddle shape. And then you will see some flat ones turn into helix and some turn into cannoli. So why pasta? We know we can do morphing food, but we want to find a type of food that shape really matters, and also it's commodity in a sense. If we can, if we can tackle this flat packaging problem, we can actually do a little contribution to the planet. So if you're fascinated by pasta, you know that. You're supposed to pair different sauce with different shapes, with the meat and fish sauce and tomato sauce. You're supposed to You're supposed to pair it with different shapes. That's why Italian Barilla company has over hundreds of pasta shape, and the intricate 3D shapes are really hard to pack. And also, they are much more delicate, they take more space. So this project is really about tackling that making things flat, easier to pack as well, but also take fewer space. But then once you boil it, it can take on the shape. So we don't sacrifice the consumer's experience, but we use smart material design to sort of save the space. And speaking of smart material design, so we actually think about, in this case, the pasta material as a type of smart material. You can encode information into it. So this is, while the project was going on, this is the student who worked on the project, made a programmable heart when he tried to propose. So this basically shows you can really arbitrarily sort of design any end shape, and you can start from a flat shape and program it to do a certain transformation when you cook them. It's a little bit of the science behind. I don't know. I would assume most of the folks here are computer science background, maybe. So a little bit of a chemistry here. So why the pasta can morph? Because of the starch, which is the dominant components of the semolina flour, can swell in water. And it's also a chemical reaction. As it gets heated up and swell, it also breaks itself down and becomes amylose, which is more sticky. So it's really a swelling and also a chemical reaction that's going on when you cook pasta and when they become al dente and eventually overcooked. So things swell. You know that pasta will become fatter and thicker. But that does not give us that transformation. So what we have to do in this case is extremely simple. You basically introduce micro grooves on one side of a pasta sheet, so that micro groove can tune the swelling rate and ratio. So essentially, when you cook it, the side with the groove will end up swell a little bit more slowly than the other side. That's why as it get boiled, it bends up. And because, as I said, it's also a chemical reaction, starch turns into a sticky amylose, so it kind of glued and fixed the already transformed shape. So that's what's going on. And from a scientific research perspective, we are fascinated by this phenomenon because there are a lot of nonlinear soft matter science going on. And it's very hard for my student and myself to simulate. So we had to work with computational mechanics folks to really kind of predict and simulate this morphing behavior. So what you see in this video, the bottom row are the simulation results. So here it shows the automated fabrication methods. Perhaps you can already guess the intricate morphing shape is dictated by the grooving pattern, the orientation of the grooves and distribution of those as well. So we had to basically customize a robotic arm handled stamping system to produce the specific groove. Yes.
So what's interesting about pasta is while they make all the shapes, they actually taste different, even though it's the same, ingredient. And so it's like the texture and the shape. So I'm wondering, did you ever test by having these grooves now that are normal in that kind of pasta? Does it somehow taste different or cause people to picture it differently?
Yeah, we in a Kai paper we wrote, we did run a user study. We were more comparing, so we were comparing flat ones and also the shaped ones. We were also comparing the sort of the officially, like a commercial bought shaped ones and our shaped ones. People didn't really talk too much about the differences. I think your tongue is not extremely sensitive about the micro grooves on the surface of our pasta because the grooves are really tiny. So the gaps is sub-millimeter. Yeah, but I don't know. I think if you're a really good foodie person, maybe you can tell the difference. Yeah. So speaking of the flavor, the pasta is made only semolina flour and water. So we actually got authentic recipe from the Barilla. I do think the ingredients might be also equally important or even more important than the grooves on the surface itself. Yeah. So the video while I was talking just played was basically my postdoc who worked on the project went into the forest and went on a hike and cooked some pasta with her portable gas cooker and was able to see the transformation. So this was inspired by a savvy mountain hiker professor who said, oh yeah, saving the packaging space is actually kind of cool for mountain hiking. So which brought us to this application idea brainstorming session. So we thought originally this could be a product for, say, the packaging space and a shelf storage space. But we also think for hikes and space travels. We had a brief conversation with NASA at a certain point, trying to convince them, because a space travel, astronauts crave Earth-like food. It's really important to bring pasta and bread onto the space stations. But then the packaging space is really precious. Maybe our flat pack pasta could play a role there. So yeah, we were still hopeful that conversation could continue. So again, so this is my first point about future designer and how we think about developing our projects and create our inventions with the idea of environmental consciousness. So I'm gonna continue with my second point. I wanted to say interdisciplinary, but I do think that my second point is beyond being interdisciplinary, so I call it X across X. What that means is, yes, you need to almost work across disciplines, but also work across scales and work across different mindsets, and bring those mindsets into our design thinking. So a case study to argue my point. And this is also a relatively recent project. It's still going on, so we started a couple of years ago to look at a specific seed. So this one is called erodium. A lot of them could be found in Africa. When it rains, the coiled body can basically respond to the rain and uncoil. As it uncoils, it drives the body rotate. And that rotation will push the very end part of this structure, which is where the seed is located, into the ground. So it's a self-bearing behavior. And you might as well want to call it a little robot, but triggered by the environmental stimuli, in this case, the rain. And we're very fascinated by it. Originally, right, just out of curiosity, we wanted to see whether we can produce an engineering equivalent of the same structure in the lab. And on the right, you are seeing a video playing. So this is an artificial version that we produced with actually chemically processed thin wood veneer. And we are able to imitate the similar phenomenon. Basically, when rain comes, it rotates and self-bury. The larger idea here is to think about a system. Basically, we can use drone to carry tons of those carriers. We can then also incorporate the target seeds into the carrier. For example, for a reforestation context, we could carry lots of tree seeds. And we can drop them onto the ground. And once rain comes, they all self-bury into the soil and eventually germinate. This idea came from some collaboration with Accenture and also a bunch of interviews with ecologists and also some forestry people, because you know, we really care about planting trees, especially in California. So many trees are burned down, and the Cal Fire Department invests lots of, actually millions of dollars each year to plant trees. But the state-of-art technique to plant tree is using your hand, dig a hole and place a seedling inside. Extremely slow, expensive, and also it's kind of dangerous for the volunteers and staff members to do so. And then people use drone. But when you use drone to broadcast seeds, they just land on the ground. The harsh environment will kill them with the sun, and the birds will come and eat them. So the germination rate is really low. That's why we thought, oh yeah, this could be, you know, some interesting solution for reforestation. We get the benefit of drone for broadcasting seed very cheaply, very quickly, but then we can also let them self-bury. So people or machine don't need to go to the mountain areas to do some kind of on-ground operation. So this is a pilot test we did. This was 2 years ago back in Pittsburgh, showing basically the students had a rudimental drone and rudimental deployment mechanism, but we were able to drop a couple of seeds onto the ground, wait for a whole afternoon, about 6 hours of rain, and you can see some of the seed carriers successfully drill into the ground. So we went much further ever since I moved to California. So we learned Berkeley actually has a few research forests, we've been running very proper, I want to say, field tests in the forest, also with tree seeds, which is 10 times much harder to work with than vegetable seeds we've been using 2 years ago. And we also work with ecologists, try to really be conscious in the way we carry those field tests in the actual forest. We've been using Douglas fir, which is also a critical species in the reforestation effort in California in general. Yeah, so we went pretty far, and that whole effort is still ongoing right now. And this was the earlier field test result. Again, back in Pittsburgh, you can see there's about 60% of the seeds that ended up bearing germinated. And with the new rounds of tests we done in the Berkeley forest, actually we got even more promising result. And we are now also carrying it to Asia, like a mid-Asia desert for planting grass species. Yeah.
This reference is actually 2023, right?
2023, yes. Thanks.
You're modest. It's on the cover of Nature.
Yes, it is on the cover of Nature, and we were very proud because we thought it's a project inspired by nature, and also we are using materials sourced from nature. We're using wood veneers, but it's also contributing back to nature, and it showed up in nature. So it's cool. And so along the side, we also published some peripheral applications more in the computing field. We thought this could be an interesting IoT device. So we shared this idea in Kai community. We said, yeah, what if you have just many of those seeds? They are all interconnected, either wired or wirelessly. And you could connect biodegradable antennas, or you can also make chemical treatment to the seed carrier, so it can, for example, change color or depends on the pH conditions of the soil. You can use this to monitor the soil conditions and almost build a internet of things inside the forest that could help us to better inform different things, restoration effort or environmental monitoring effort. This is almost like a toy demo, but it shows you can attach an antenna that can have wireless communications with mobile devices. The vision is you will be able to fly a drone nearby and capture the information and communicate with the seed carrier that was previously deployed into the same land. As you can tell, I was mostly excited about the ecological restoration application scenario for this technique. We were approached by some agriculture people, and this also the magical self-bearing natural seed was originally studied by space agencies, not in the US. European and also Korean space agencies spent money to investigate the seed because they are curious how a environmentally triggered passive robot can help them to do soil monitoring and exploration in the outer space. We're hopeful with all the knowledges we learn, basically how to create the body and how to think about the force needed to drill into different soil conditions. We could also develop a smart material version, maybe for outer space, to do soil sampling. But in that case, you cannot use moisture-driven mechanism. We are mostly interested in thermal fluctuation as a way to power those passive devices. And this is the case study. And back to what points I want to make. As a designer, you wanted to go X across X. So if you think about this project, so first of all, there's materials across scale. So when we think about designing a carrier, first of all, we are looking at a centimeter scale device. Then we want to understand why this is working in a specific way, right? We have to look into the material properties and also the material construct. For example, the fiber alignment within the body of this self-carrying carrier. That's the mesoscale. And then we also had to went even a smaller scale to understand how we can manipulate the microfiber angle of a wood structure in order to get the type of actuation behavior we want. So that is the material across scale. And there's also approaches across discipline. If you think about this project, there's definitely engineering design. Maybe that's how I got the offer at the Berkeley mechanical engineering department after this project. There are a lot of analytical modeling, how we can calculate the enough thrust force for the seed pod to drill into the ground, but there's also the plant science. We wanted to plant seed, and we wanted to understand how the seed interact with our seed pod. There are a lot of constraints in terms of how you choose biodegradable, but air and water permeable material to create the seed pod. So that is a lot of plant science. But in order to deploy the seed with the vision of the drone and flying, so there are a lot of conversation about a robotic deployment devices and also how to do the path planning for the drone. So indeed, I am working with a team of mechanical engineering student and a computer science student to basically create the next generation of the drone deployment solutions. And lastly, this is also a method across fields, and we are talking about analyzing the microfiber orientations, and also understanding the hygroscopic phenomena of a cellulose-based material that is biological science. And we are talking about we have to chemically wash the wood to make it soft enough so we can produce a very large curvature actuator. So that's a little bit of chemistry. And we are also talking about understanding the behavior of the driller before we went about to fabricate that. That's computational science, especially a lot of finite element analysis on the behaviors of the morphing. So hopefully I convince you guys a little bit. X across X is very important to do this kind of design. And I also kind of want to say X across X is a little bit hard for AI to do right now. It's not because AI does not understand any of those disciplines. I think AI understands all these disciplines. It's more about the creative way as a designer to think about how to knit all these disciplines together to across the boundary was maybe not seen before by AI, therefore can't be done by AI. So I'm going to continue with my third point. So I also think the designers of today and future really have to embrace AI and think about co-design with it. Throughout the years, we really benefited from sort of co-design with AI. So back to my seed carrier, this was a hypothesis in a sense we never implemented it. But so the seed carrier I just talked about, we manually designed it with old-fashioned engineering method. But if I had extra effort, I got a talented student who are interested in this aspect, I really wanted to have a way to automatically evolve the right kind of carrier that could be tailored to all kinds of environmental conditions. That's really metaphorically interesting because that's exactly how our nature evolves things, right? The plants are able to do a self-bearing behavior because it met sparse water resources in Africa and specific land conditions. It just went creative and started to self-bury so they can plant their seeds in the right timing in order to maximize its germination rate. That's exactly how nature does it. What if we could basically run a computer simulation, use a similar evolutionary or genetic regime to kind of evolve our seed carriers to tackle different environmental conditions. So we can basically design carriers one way for Sahara Desert and the other way for California and the other way for Amazon rainforest. And indeed, all those agencies approached us. We think AI design seed could be really cool. That has not been done yet, so it's not my legitimate case study. So I did bring a little bit legitimate case study. So this is a project I wanted to use to argue AI could be interesting use cases for designers who design with smart materials and structure. So this project has been lasted for a couple of years. Started with us, had the vision of wanting to design a fully volumetric morphable matter that could achieve arbitrarily any shape and any local motion behavior. And we chose a very generalizable hardware infrastructure, in this case, basically truss structure. You can it's like a Lego, right? You can combine this truss in different ways, and each of the beam of this truss is a pneumatic actuator, so you can also freely control a multi-degree freedom system. And the video that just played is a little, cute, funny lobster robot that carry a box and move around. And you can also see some other things we designed in computer, but also built in real life. So this is, I don't know, my student call it the fox. Yeah, it can jump a little bit. And we can also design turtles. You can see we are choosing some very animal-like forms just because our trust system is able to do these kind of forms, and not necessarily because these kind of forms is a better robot. So this is as a put in your designer's head. If you think about I give you a task, you design a turtle, and you wanted to execute a few different local motion and manipulation tasks. You have hundreds of beams you can control. You can design the shape. You can also design the control policy. You can determine what is the contraction ratio of each beam. Really cool, a large design space, but it's so large that human designers can't really handle. So that's a moment when we think about co-design with AI would be really cool. So what you're seeing here is actually a pipeline talking about a genetic algorithm. So basically, the human designer come up with the initial shape, but then the AI has to determine which actuator contract at which timing and how much it contract, essentially. And this is yeah, it's very abstract, but it's showing what I just said. So the genes that you're optimizing, including the which actuator is connected with which, and also the contraction level of those actuators, and also the control policy. So one smart thing we had to do is we have to group the channels together. There are hundreds of channels. We don't want to have hundreds of tubings coming out. So AI is also helping us to sort of figure out the clustering of the pneumatic channels. So each color including a specific cluster that can be controlled with one air channel. So in that sense, the turtle is controlled by only four pneumatic tubings. So with that, you can have a collaboration with AI in a sense. You can specify the task. So for example, I'm a furniture designer. I want to make a robotic furniture that has a few behaviors. I want it to lower its height when my child comes over, and I want it to turn around and carry a coffee cup to my grandma, and I also want it to move forward in specific ways in the night to turn off the light. You set the objectives, the AI will figure out the control policies and also the channel grouping, basically. So this is a video. It's kind of cute. So again, back to my point, there's a co-design aspect that AI is collaborating with the human designers. And from a robotic design perspective, there's also a co-design of the robotic morphology and its control. It started hard for me as a designer to imagine how I would go about doing this kind of design without any help from a machine learning or AI algorithm. And moving forward, these were not realized. But computationally, physically, we did not realize it. So why you want to make a truss robot? Now you have humanoid and four-leg robot. So if you have a truss, you can really push the definition of a robot to be something morphable and co-living with our physical environment, familiar environment. We can make a morphable bed, for example, that could freely move the patients around. We could also imagine making a morphable object for your mixed reality or VR experiences. I could freely transform a bottle into a banana. I not only can transform the shape, I can also transform the weight. because they're all just fluidic channels, right? I could pump in water, I could suck it out, I could change the center of gravity. You can really have a kind of fully embodied physically immersed experiences. And one thing we thought is you can have a backpack turn into a wing. And then you really do require both shape changing and also the center of gravity and total weight shifting. And this is something the truss system could allow us to do. The real limitation is the manufacturability. And we do think some of the more advanced 3D printing can allow us to print complex meshes like these. Okay, so I'm going to power through the rest of the points. My next point as a designer, you really, which is related to the previous point. So you wanted to behave like a dual citizen, and this is really old topic, but I think it's important, so I'm bringing it up. You wanted to operate in both the computational world and also the physical world. So that's true in most of the projects we did in our lab. So if this is a different project for me to make my point. So this is a smart material that can self-fold into some target shape. So here you are seeing a disc turn into a rose flower through self-folding when you give it a little bit of extra heat. So here, there are a lot of physical world fabrication experiment that is us living in the physical world. But there are a lot of computational understanding of predicting the transformation through residual stress release of a thermoplastic. That is how we have to reside in the computational world. And that is true in most of the projects we carried in the past. In almost all the projects I talk about, you see a digital twin of some sort behind what I showed as physical artifacts, including the shape-changing pasta. So a little bit more about this rose flower that resides in both worlds. This has been also quite of a long time pursued in the lab. We look at self-assembly and self-folding structures, especially out of shape memory thermoplastic. So you are seeing a rose flower here. If you wanted to print it, this was before the bamboo time. It takes 8 hours and also a lot of supporting materials to get it done. With bamboo, maybe you can take 3-4 hours for this shape. But if you can print a shape flat, which sequentially turn into a rose flower, you can really save a lot of printing time. Maybe you can take 30 minutes to an hour to do a flat shape, and you can also save all the supporting materials. So this is how we designed and printed this flat shape, and once you put it in hot water, this shape can then self-fold into a rose flower. I said the computational aspect is also important because without that, we can't know, right, for sure what the flat shape will turn into. I'll very quickly go through a little bit of the science behind, because some of you guys would be curious. So why we can print with actually very cheap off-the-shelf PLA filament, something that can self-fold. So when PLA is a stereotypical shape memory polymer, so the polymer chains are stayed in very chaotic random mode when you bought them off the shelf. But when you melt them down and print them on a cold printing substrate, you are straightening and forcing the polymer chain to stay more straight. But that's not the lowest energy state. The material likes to stay in a higher entropy state. That's why when you sort of heat it up again, so the polymer chain will bounce back and become more random, and this macroscopically cause a shrinkage of the material. That's actually a lot of you perhaps experience if you use very cheap 3D printer. You see a warpage. That's because the polymer chain is trying to pull itself back. So we are, I guess, playing with the warpage effect to an extreme. So we're printing this type of shrinkable polymer on top of a non-shrinkable polymer, such as TPU. And then when you heat it up, the bilayer can bend up. And you can computationally simulate the bending angle. And depends on what's the width of your active part, you can also control the bending angle. And now, if you put your computational designer's head, you could say, hey, now if I can control bending angle, I can sort of design arbitrary origami shapes. So that's why you can see a bunny can be simplified into a few numbers of basically faces. We can also calculate the angles between each face and also convert that into a G-code that corresponds to the bending angle of our morphable material. So I'm going to skip this right side part, but it's basically talking about how can we convert a known origami computational pipeline into a 4D printing pipeline. Because in origami models, right, you usually sort of ignore the width of the folding hinges. But when you talk about smart material that can fold, that width is not ignorable. So you have to do a little bit of smart math to translate the traditional sharp origami into curved origami model, per se. And this is what the tool can do. Again, a simplified bunny, flatten it, calculate the folding angle, and then you can convert that into G-code to do the flat printing, and then the flat printing can self-fold back into the bunny shape. And if you have a computational pipeline, you can basically design other kind of target shapes that can be flatly foldable. And I'm kind of excited about this furniture, and I did bring this to IKEA research lab and try to convince them your flat packable furniture once on site is very complicated to assemble. What if your furniture can self-fold? So that conversation went as far as their fabrication shop, but not on their shelf. But as a general vision to think about how this type of self-assembled shape memory materials can be used a way to re-envision a circular manufacturing pipeline. You are saving printing time, support material, packaging and transportation space. It's assembly effort because it's self-fold, and also the whole structure can be made of a single plastic, so you can completely recycle. And that story can perhaps only be true if you try to scale it up to something that actually has real life meaning beyond a rose flower. So we recently started to work with the Department of Energy and also an architecture group from ETH, try to think about how we can morph much larger constructs, potentially build houses and even future wind turbines, basically things that are harder to be transported to a remote site. How can we leverage the solar energies on concentrated solar energies on site to trigger some of the self-morphing behavior? Okay, I know I'm a little out of time, so I'm gonna quickly go through the last 2 points, but skipping through the example. My only leftover case study, I'm trying to prove the point that designers have to break boundary. Again, it's a little bit X cross X, but this is bring the boundary even more so and extending to art. This was a project from a quite long time ago when I was a PhD student. So we are studying a nano actuator to start with this bacteria. It's called Bacillus subtilis. And it has a very high energy density, actually more stronger than shape memory alloy if you're familiar with it. But it's also very sensitive to moisture. If you breathe on it, you can see the volumetric expansion of the bacteria. So we cultivated millions of those bacteria in the lab and started to place them on a piece of fabric that responds to your skin conditions. And you can see this garment basically can stay closed when your body is cool, and the scales will open up when your body started to get sweatier and hotter. So we also went ahead to collaborate with New Balance, and we also did art installation in Center Pompidou to showcase how a genetically modified bacteria that can both glow and transform could bring a morphable shoe that glow in dark into people's life. So I put this example here, although it's Asian, because I think it shows how designers can really be the bridge, not only to bridge the nanoscience and biological science, genetic engineering, but also collaborate, in our case, with the ballet dancer, and also exhibit your work in an art context, really broaden your vision, basically, and perhaps also a real-world, meaningful commercial product. Okay, come to the very last point. This is, again, super relevant, but I want to make a point. So data-driven, I think data is going to be a material for all the designers, no matter you deal with physical or virtual design. If you deal with computational design, that's obvious. But I want to bring up this picture because maybe it's not so obvious if you are dealing with industrial designs and physical things, how data is relevant. So for what we do in the lab, there are tons of data we collect, for example, from our user studies, from our product evaluation, but also from our physical characterizations we do in the lab, but also from, for example, the fabrication machines, even some of the printing parameters, all those things are generating data. And if you use them in different ways, you could either optimize your design processes or speed up your simulation or eventually let AI generate the different designs for you. So many creative ways of using that. This is a summary page to just say what I just said. 6 principles of thinking about design operating between the virtual and the real world. And back to my original anxious, exciting question. So as of a designer of today, how do we think about working with AI, but also combat AI in a sense? We wanted to show there's a meaning for a designer to exist or for a human being to exist in this planet. I don't know if this is a logical answer, but it's answers out of our practice. It's really about asking radically different questions, pave unprecedented path, and redefine design. A lot of what AI can do are based on what they can learn and what informations that sort of exist and knowledges that's already generated by a human being. But if we are asking questions that have never been asked and we're generating knowledge that have ever not been generated, there perhaps a chance we can create a little bit of a breakthrough out of this AI-human relationship dilemma. So will designer become obsolete? I, of course, don't hope that's the case. And I got very inspired by some recent MIT Tech Review articles. So they were talking about now designers' definition is drastically expanded. Maybe you are designing costumes for humanoid in the very near future. Who knows? But everything can be designed. You can design. In the context of that article, they were talking about you can design drugs, exoskeletons. You can design, dead and living hybrid, artificial and natural hybrid. I do think it's a really exciting time for us, and there are so many possibilities, and all the technologies are so democratizing. We can really use all of this as materials to do our creative pursuit. So yeah, with that, I'd love to thank all the collaborators that are involved in the projects I talk about, and if you still have time, answer any questions. Thank you.
Hey, Linning, wonderful talk and so timely too. I'm wondering, you paint a really exciting picture of the potential role for the design, and then also, with my educator hat on, like a real challenge in terms of like, how do we think about educating this next generation designer? And I think about the amazing work that you do, and I think the question is, do we need to find more amazing Linnings, or how do we help mentor these amazing Linnings, or how do we help, kind of do this? And so I guess I'm wondering, like, given all of these things that you're showing, these 6 things, can we expect any one designer or any one student to do this? And then what do we need to change in terms of design education to make that possible?
Yeah, very hard question.
Yeah.
I started to get into a little bit of this. I guess now I'm sort of involved in the Jacobs Institute of Design. As I told you, I sort of went through different design education. My personal experience has always been a little bit siloed. So when I was in industrial design program, most of the students around me are having the background of, like, they draw things, and it's very hard for them, for example, to even have a conversation with a biologist. It's always intimidating to think about one day you could use a scanning electron microscope to do anything at micro scale, and how that's even relevant to the product scale things I'm interested in. It's the breaking the mindset. That's why I said almost like crossing mindset thinking. I also think it's really important to, from an educational perspective, build programs that you welcome which is obvious, by the way. You welcome students also coming from different disciplines, but in a genuine way to be passionate about design. So I know this school had a lot of pioneering sort of effort to bring interdisciplinary thinking. I don't know how much. I guess you guys were carrying projects from the beginning, brainstorming conceptual strategy, but also sort of keep pushing to the lab, to the implementation, to the deployment. I guess going through the full cycle with cross-mind skill sets and vision is also really important. Yeah, and I also felt the most effective place for me sort of educate designers of this type is in my lab. I think it's very important to let students go through the process, go through the struggle, and encourage them to have access. So industrial designer coming to my lab started to get access to a science lab, being able to use high-end microscopes and learn how to culture bacteria and mussels. Once they know it becomes part of their toolbox, then they can really unleash their designer's creative thinking. And also the courage to let designer take a lead in some of those efforts, because I feel a lot of the times to access high-end equipment and expensive things, usually it's engineers, I feel, and scientists are leading some of those efforts, like how I place designer in the center and really be brave to think about how they lead a bunch of scientists to carry out the project. I think that mindset is also important. But yeah, you must be more experienced in thinking about this, yeah. Yeah.
I just want to say something, because I'm a designer, also I'm a design educator. I was a professor at the University of Missouri School of Journalism. So I taught multimedia design, data visualization, information design. So just for your question, I think for your very interesting topic about the future designers, but actually, in the real world, with designers, we solve the problem in the reality. But as the educator, we have to educate our students to lead the future, how the future design can develop or make our society more better in the future. So I think that two kinds of questions, two abilities. You solve the problem in the reality, but you have to think about it in the future. So you your head have two sides. Okay, this is my world, this is the future world. But there has some connection between them. About the AI, I use AI in my design process. Actually, I think AI is not so smart than what we expected. So this is another topic about AI. So I just want to say something about design and education. It's a very interesting topic. Yeah, I think it's very wonderful, very, very great topic. I really like your topic.
Thank you.
Okay, really great talk. I think I have a question that sort of maybe builds on the question that you asked. How are design tools changing, right? Across all the projects that you presented, it's hard for me to conceive of what are good tools that bridge computation and fabrication and nature, and that sort of helps you explore the design, the problem space and solution space across these things. So I'm curious as to over the years, has your lab sort of built new tools that has been your secret sauce, or the tools that you're using to maybe train your PhD students, or tools that you think might benefit in disseminating these principles that you've sort of so nicely articulated today?
Yeah, very good question. I know you are expert in computational, that's you're asking. For our case, first of all, confess, a lot of our projects are inspired and initiated experimentally first. Often we get fascinated by a physical phenomenon, we go into it, and then we think about computational tools to facilitate the design. So I guess we're not so systematical in a sense. But there I guess is a trajectory. So a lot of the earlier discussion are on the prediction of a certain morphing phenomenon. So in a sense, simulation tools. So given a specific stress field, how do you even predict what shape it morph into? It's a purely simulation tool. And once AI came, and we started to also talk about how you can use AI to accelerate some of those really complex simulation that often take hours to run. Then we got, because the nature of the designer want to do things, we don't just want to predict and simulate things. So a lot of the conversation ends up inverse design tool. Yeah, let's say I want to design a boat that are supposed to be self-folded from a flat piece. How the flat piece should look like. The designer's asking for the end goal, and how do we go through the inverse design process? Some of the earlier experimentation, perhaps before the machine learning age, was geometrical calculation, for example, flat origami flattening algorithm, and some are using some optimization method, not so much, I guess AI you call it, but not so much machine learning. But nowadays, some students in my lab also started to use ChatGPT to do inverse design in a sense. So for example, recently there's a robot design task. So they could basically already fit in a large language model, an entire simulation model. But then now you request, and you have some grammar definitions of what robots you're designing, but then you just ask the ChatGPT to design like a robot with a certain behavior. The optimization methods are automatically chosen by the large language model in this sense. It's always inverse design. It's always creative goal that AI can facilitate designer. But throughout the years, I guess we use different tools that are the most effective of that year. Let's say, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we're at time. Let's thank Lemming once again.